mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Chapter 6 of Apple TV's Pachinko. I always knew it would be a little bit hard, I think, for this show to follow up to Episode 4, because Episode 4 was so strong. But it feels to me like the show is it's starting to fall and lag a little bit behind. When I say lag behind, I mean like it's not keeping the consistent level of engagement out of me, at least, that it was through those first 4 episodes. It kind of feels like it's slowing down. I'm able to poke a little bit more holes in the into the show as well. Like, there's still great moments, and I think this show is becoming one that really swings for the emotional fences, goes for those big scenes that really have a strong emotional impact, and it's still knocking that kind of stuff out of the park. But now there's starting to be things that, as the show has progressed, that I'm starting to see that are making me go, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I like that. And it's become a little bit less engaging than it was through the first 4 episodes. But there's a lot to talk about from this episode, and I think some of those things are going to kind of like give a little bit of insight into what I think this show does right and what's not quite resonating with me at this point after 6 episodes with, I believe, 2 left. You know, I read an article, and it was written by somebody who had read the book, which I haven't. And please don't be one of those people. Please don't be one of those people who like can't wait to brag about how you've read the book and how the show or the movie is inferior to the book. Like that whole like patting yourself on the back because you look more intellectual because you've read a book. Like, those people, gross. But glad you read the book. But whoever it was who wrote this article said that they think the show would probably be better if it played out in a linear fashion. And I can't help but kind of agree with that. And it's tough for me to pinpoint why. I think it kind of revolves around... Okay, well, here, let me give an example. Yellow Jackets is another show that does not play out in linear fashion, and it jumps to multiple timelines involving the same characters. So you see some characters as children or as teenagers, and you see those same characters as adults. But I think it works for Yellowstone because there's so much mystery to unravel to keep you engaged. And each jump between timelines can help give you some more insight into the overall big picture. And when you're dealing with like a mystery show like that, getting more insight into the big picture, especially from various angles and time periods, actually makes it more engaging. But with this show, you're telling a linear story in a, I don't want to say jumbled because that makes it sound, that's a little bit unfair, but in a non-linear fashion. And I think that can cause issues within certain aspects of the story that exist to be more noticeable. Because if you're playing out in linear fashion, those issues can kind of like come and go, and you're just watching the story and you're like, oh, that part, but oh, this part's good though, but that part was kind of weird, whatever, and it plays out, but you're not really, because you're looking at the big picture, you're looking at the entire story that you're watching, and you might see little issues here and there. But when it plays out in this non-linear fashion, and say you go from a really compelling portion of a story to another really compelling portion, and then to a part that's not really working well, and then back to a really good portion, that part that's not really working well stands out so much more. And I think the show is starting to suffer from that, because now I'm starting to notice the things that don't work a little bit more than I probably would otherwise. Let me go through my notes here. I do a lot of notes for this show because this show is very dense. So it's like I spend time kind of like reorganizing my notes to kind of get my thoughts out in an order and in a way that I think makes sense and can keep these videos within a certain time frame, 15 to 20 minutes, and it's not all over the place, or I'm not like leaving stuff out that I would like to talk about. So I glance over my notes a lot when I'm doing these videos, but particularly for Pachinko. But what I was saying is, like, this storyline, when you have these parts that don't really work, they stand out a little bit more. And I think this is most evident with the portions that involve Solomon. Because Solomon's part of the story, and I think I read this in an article too, is that Solomon is largely not really in the book, like, and is very, or at least to a far less degree and less significant degree than he is on the show. And I think that's starting to show now. You know, a character, and this is something where Game of Thrones had this problem too, is that when you don't have the story to mine from, you know, an adapted screenplay, like you have this book, that being the 5 books released so far in the Song of Ice and Fire series, when you have that groundwork already laid for you and your job is to just convert it into a TV format, I think that's a little bit easier than having to start from scratch. And I think everybody kind of agrees that once Game of Thrones no longer had the books to model the show after, the quality of the show suffered. And I think we're kind of seeing that right now with Solomon, whereas like I'm assuming that since someone, whatever it was I read, that said that Solomon is far less important in the book than he is in the show, I'm assuming that a lot of the stuff we might be seeing with Solomon could be new to the show. And that could also be why those aspects of the show just don't seem to hit as well. It makes it easier for you to become less engaged in the story when you have these moments that kind of just like suck the air out of the room. And I'm not trying to shit on like Solomon's story like that, but I'm just saying, like, if you have like this high level shit coming like scene after scene, and then you hit Solomon's shit and it doesn't really hit the same, you notice that more, and it's easier to kind of like pull you out of it when you might have been engaged in the story. And that's not an issue if, let's say, the young Sunja's life plays out in linear fashion over the course of, say, 2-3 episodes. You don't leave that, then you can really just enjoy that portion of the story, and you'll look at those 3 episodes like, oh, this is great. And then say by the time we get to Solomon in 1989, maybe you don't like the Solomon portion, but maybe if it plays out in linear fashion, maybe you like it more, or maybe at least you can be like, okay, well, I didn't like this portion of this episode. But it harms the episodes, I think, to have moments that feel great and then moments that kind of like take you out of it a little bit. But I also think that hold on, let me check this out real quick. Oh yeah, right. So another problem I think with the kind of the non-linear fashion is that this show in particular, that non-linear fashion makes it a little bit more difficult to follow, because you have a storyline where you have a person going from Japan to Korea. You have another storyline where you have that same person in a different timeline going from Korea to Japan. You have these mixtures of languages and all that you're supposed to be learning about the culture. And I think it's a little bit harder to pick up on that stuff when it's you have to kind of like reorient yourself. Like you might get to a new scene or a new episode and you're like, okay, Sunja is in this place at this time. She's at this place. She came from this other place, and you just kind of gotta reorient yourself. And there's a little bit of a, at least for me, a little bit of a like, okay, let me reestablish everything that's going on when we go from story to story, because like I said, the languages switch up. The time period switches up, the location, like the back and forth. You know, one moment, like I said, within one episode, Sunja's in Japan, she's in Korea, and there's really no, and you have to just try to remember at which point in her life did she go from one place to the next, and that's a little bit tricky, I think. And I think that makes that is also something that can kind of like pull you out of the story and make you a little bit less engaged. So, I want to start with the opening of the episode. It's a flashback to Solomon and Hannah when they were children. And she kind of like peer pressures him into stealing from this store. And he does, and he gets caught, and he gets arrested. His dad eventually comes, and he's bailed out. We don't know who bailed him out. I mean, who does child Solomon know with money? Let's see. He's Sunja's grandson. Who does Sunja know with money? But we still have to bring Kohansu and Sunja back together, and I think that quote-unquote reunion is inevitable given the events of the end of the episode. But we flash back to that. He gets out of jail, and his father sends him to America, which, I mean, on the surface, I'm like, this is a bit of an overreaction, right? But again, I don't know, what is it, 1970 something? I don't know, 70s Japan culture, maybe being caught stealing is something that Solomon and his family or his character cannot really recover from, or can't recover from very easily. And maybe that's not an overreaction. I can't sit here and say in 2022 in America that Solomon's dad overreacted in 1970s Japan. I just don't know. It could be different. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that was a little interesting how that was just like, yeah, you out and we will figure this out, but you got to go to America, dog. Like, what? You're deporting your son because he stole some candy? All right, if you say so, 1970s Japan. But in this episode, again, still sticking with Solomon here, his story again goes in a different direction. And I think, I said this as a question after, I think, episode 3 maybe, or whichever episode is the one where Solomon decides that he's not going to have the grandmother sign the paperwork to give up her house. He tells her not to sign. She doesn't. Everyone screams at him and he leaves and he's dancing in the rain with the band. I think that was the end of episode 3. But at that point, I was like, where does Solomon's story go at this point? And it's gone somewhere different in every episode since. And I think that's, again, another flaw in this show and in the Solomon storyline, in that I can't get invested in Solomon because it seems like his storyline changes in a dramatic way that's uninteresting to me every week. And you can't do that and have me be invested in what happens to him. It's like, okay, I was invested in the woman selling her land in that story. But now in this episode, we end up with him, after he goes to collect his stuff from Shifley, he throws it out into like this water that's outside, like a pond or like a fountain. And this guy, last name Yoshi, comes up to him. I think we've seen him throughout the series so far. And he comes up to him and he's like, yeah, you and me are a lot alike, yada, yada, yada. And he essentially proposed this idea that they open up pachinko parlors in other countries. And I'm just like, where is this coming from? Like, this feels so random. And if they had just played the Solomon story in linear fashion, maybe they could have built up to that to where I could see how this is how we have arrived at this moment. But like it felt so random. It's like, okay, this is Solomon's adventure of the week now. Is like, next week he's gonna start opening pachinko parlors, and I'm sure it's gonna come back around somehow, but it's not really landing right now. It's like, how am I supposed to be invested in this? Where does this come from? There was no path leading here. It's just like, I mean, there was technically a path leading there, but like it just feels like another, we had him go on this like miniature adventure where he runs into his dad's friend, and then they have the whole dinner and all this kind of stuff. He insults him with the money, and okay, that was like the Solomon story adventure that week. And it's like, now we're about to have this pachinko parlors and other country storyline, and I don't know. And then again with Solomon, they continue to, I thought Solomon made a turn, right? This is, again, the Solomon story is so herky-jerky because after those first 3 episodes, I think face turn for Solomon. I sat here on camera and I said, it seems like he's let go of the corporate kind of, I'll do anything to get success mindset, and he's now embracing his culture. And I thought, okay, Solomon has turned a corner. Then we enter this episode, which, again, maybe if this played out in linear fashion, maybe this makes sense. Maybe this scene happens before, or, before maybe he comes to his realization with the grandmother and signing the paperwork. But for some reason, now he seems to have regressed and gone full heel turn, and he's right back on the same, anything for success shit. And I'm like, what is going on with this guy's story? Because he seemed like he was redeemed at the end of episode 3. And then in this episode, he goes to Sunja at the hospital and is like, it's your fault that I got fired. You made me weak by telling me not to have this woman sign. Like, he snaps on her, and like, you can't snap on Sunja and not become an instant bad guy. And then she owns his fucking soul and essentially says, I could have had all these riches and I didn't. And he's like, why? He's like, because sometimes it's more important than achieving success is how you got it. And how is Solomon learning this lesson again? And I think, again, that is the problem with the Solomon portion of this show, and where I think this show has found a few issues. And his storyline seems to have no clear path or direction. It just kind of feels like shit happening each week. And it's the Solomon stuff is just not working for me at all. But I am through shitting on this episode. I'm not even shitting on this episode. I'm really just shitting on the Solomon stuff. I just don't think it's good. And I think Solomon being less important in the books, I think this is a clue of how sometimes when you're writing a show or a film, and by no means am I trying to speak as an expert. I haven't written any shows or any films, but I've just seen this play out in this manner, that sometimes when you're adapting something from an already established work, it's easier to take that work and mold it into something different than it is to create it from scratch. And I think that's evident here, assuming it's true that Solomon isn't as fleshed out in the books as they are attempting to do on the show, and that they have to create a lot of these things new for the show. It shows, because like some of the Solomon stuff is kind of bad at times. Like the example of him seemingly getting past his drive for success and embracing his culture, to have him go right back to square one like 3 episodes later. Again, that's symptomatic of the dynamic I just explained, and of the fact that the story is not told linearly. Maybe you tell it linearly, and maybe you can make that make sense. So we also see a lot of Hannah this week, adult Hannah. We haven't seen her, Hannah, I don't know, I'm going to call her Hannah. We haven't seen her at all to this point, just the phone calls with Solomon, but we see her a lot in this episode. She has AIDS. The hospital that she's in tells Solomon's father and her mother that they can't care for her. Because, remember too, we're talking about 1989. How much is known about AIDS at this time? Very little, especially how you can treat it. And they're like, we can't do anything. But some doctor comes in and is like, I think I can handle it. And it sounds like it's more like, I can't fix her, but I can help lessen her pain or her discomfort as we move toward the inevitable. I think that's kind of what this doctor was talking about. But Hannah has an interesting episode. She shit talks her mother. She shit talks Solomon. She shit talks Sunja. And again, what did I say? You can get by shit talking everybody else, but once you start shit talking Sunja, you start to become the bad guy. And the most interesting portion of these 3 people, is the situation with Sunja. She says that after Solomon left, Sunja said something like, it was basically good that he left because they would have ruined him. And she said, you said they, but you meant me. And Sunja's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I didn't say that. Then she like reminds her of something, and she goes, oh yeah, no, I was talking about myself. Like, I would ruin him. And she said that because she had another son who she ruined and that is now gone. And what happened to him, we don't know. We can connect the dots and see that the son that she gave birth to in this episode, who they named Noah, and obviously was not named what's Solomon's father's name? Mazusa or Mazuka? I don't know, something like that. But whatever it is, it's clearly not his father's name. And we find out that she has another son, and we don't know what happened to him. So we'll hopefully find that information out. And then there's also another good scene with Hannah where, and this is what the show does well. Like that scene with Sunja where she mentions, that she was talking about herself, and that she had this other son that she ruined and who's now gone. I wonder if that son ended up going to live with Kohansu. That would be interesting. Anyway, like maybe she just like couldn't provide for him well. Maybe something happens to Isaac. She has to take care of himself. She can't provide for him well. Kohansu and all his money comes along, and maybe that son leaves with him. And that's why she would think that she ruined him and why he's gone. I don't know. We'll see. But another thing, like I said, this show does well is these big emotional moments. And there's a great scene with Hannah where she's, after she's been talking poorly and insulting her mother up to this point, she says something like, do I look hideous? Because her skin is all, it's messed up from the illness. She has like lesions on her face and stuff like that. And she's like, I don't care what you look like. You're still my Hannah. I just don't want you to be in pain. Something to that degree. And it's a really sad scene. And I think they did a good job of building up to that scene with Hannah's mistreatment of everybody up to that point. How she got Solomon arrested as kids, and then now how she's been just treating everybody like shit up to this point. But now that she feels like she's kind of reaching the end, I think anyone who at that point, they want to try to start making amends, and she seems to come down off of her aggressive kind of nature and just kind of opens up a little bit. And I think that scene is a really nice scene. Another scene I liked, at some point Isaac is walking down the street after he's left from Sunja giving birth, which we'll talk about that a little bit. But He leaves, and he's approached by a woman who essentially wants him to talk to her son. I guess her son is into all kinds of nefarious shit, or he's down the wrong path. And she wants Isaac to talk this guy out of it and to talk him into coming home and I guess being a good kid. And Isaac finds this guy, and the guy actually schools Isaac about how he's sick of Koreans being treated like shit by the Japanese. He says that they play by the rules, but they're still cold and hungry. And then he has a line that I thought was really, really interesting. He says something like, the way that they're treated, it drives us to drink and then go home and beat our wives, so that way we know we're not the lowest. And I thought that was like, man, that's some heavy shit to frame domestic abuse in that way. And I don't want to make it sound like political, like a topic, because this is what 1930s Japan. It's not about domestic abuse and all this kind of shit, but it's still interesting to feel as if you're that subjugated that you need to take that out on somebody else, so that way you can understand, like, at least I'm not the very bottom of the totem pole. There's somebody beneath me. And to build yourself up, to use that to build yourself up and make yourself feel better, the knowledge, like, I'm not at the bottom. There's somebody who's worse than me, and I can exploit that, and I can feel better about myself by treating that person like they're worse than me. That's some fucked up, heavy duty stuff, man. So I think that actually had an impact on Isaac, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, because it kind of plays into another scene that I didn't particularly care for. But Isaac left the house as Sunja was going into labor, and what I liked about that scene too is that she seemed very measured. She was breathing. She was clearly in pain, but she was kind of just calm. And then once he left, she started screaming, and I thought that was, again, just another sign to Sunja's strength, that she didn't want to show weakness with him there. She seemed to be she seemed to have everything together, but once he left, she felt like she could freely feel how she was feeling and be how she wanted to be, which I thought that was an interesting moment. I won't call it a nice moment, but it was an interesting moment. So Isaac leaves. He has the conversation that I just mentioned, but then he also goes to the bar and he finds Yosef there, and they have a conversation. And the police come in and they're making everybody like empty their bags and shit like that, being assholes. And Isaac wants to, clearly gassed up by this conversation with this other guy, wants to stand up and do something, and Yosef calms him down. And I think that is indicative of another problem I have with the show. They have really hammered home the idea of how the Koreans have been treated in Japan. And it's like, after the first few episodes, it's like, wow, that's fucked up, and you understand it. Now it's kind of to the point where, like, I'm ready to see them deal with it. I don't need more examples. I already got it. I understand the treatment of the Koreans by the Japanese. It's been clear since episode 1, but I'll take the extra examples for a couple more episodes. Now we're at episode 6. And you're still giving me examples, because nothing came of this. Isaac didn't do anything. The only thing that came out of this, I think, was they showed us that Isaac was kind of motivated to start doing something on his own, and then him and Yosef have an interesting conversation after they leave the bar. But like, nothing really, like, I didn't learn anything from this. I already knew, I understand the Korean treatment at this point. Let's stop giving me examples like I don't get it. And let's just now start seeing people deal with it and work through it and proceed and move forward. Like, I don't need more examples. Like, I get it. I get it. I don't need one every week. But they leave, and Yosef basically tells Isaac, like, you don't need to turn up like this. Like, you don't need to save everybody. Like, and he I can't remember how he words it, but he essentially says, like, you saved Sunja, like, calling him, basically like you saved her from her pregnancy by some wayward guy. Like, but he doesn't know the situation. And Isaac checks him, and I love that scene, because it was basically like telling him, like, watch your mouth, talking about my wife. She's stronger than you could ever possibly imagine, and she's the reason I'm still alive, so shut the fuck up. And I thought that was a great scene. I love seeing Isaac really defend her like that. And then lastly in this episode, the episode ends with Kohansu basically saying, like, to his wife, you ain't gotta fuck me no more. I got a boy by somebody else, so you can go ahead. I'm curious where the Kohansu stuff is going, because is he going to go after? Because he was very strong in whatever episode that was in the first 3, where he's like, you're going to go to Japan and you're going to wish you had me and my money and you're going to regret it. You're going to come back asking for me, begging for me, and I'm going to tell you to get the fuck on. He was very confident in that. And then now here he is, not being concerned about it all by Sunja. And I don't even know how he knows the son has been born. I wonder if that's a question that's going to get answered. Are we supposed to be wondering, how does he even know this? That this son has been born? Because I'm wondering that. But I don't know if the show wants me to wonder that, or if that's something, and they're going to explain it later. Like maybe there's somebody there kind of keeping tabs on her on his behalf. Or if the show is just like wanting me to accept it. And that I won't accept. But he would just know that. But yeah, again, like this episode has some great moments, as each of these episodes have. But I think the chinks in the armor, that was a terrible phrase to use. But the flaws in the show are becoming more evident, and they're starting to stand out a little bit more. The Solomon stuff is really not working for me, and I really don't need to be explained to every week on how Koreans are treated in Japan. Like, I get it. So 2 more episodes left. We still have a lot of questions to be answered. Sunja's older son, what happens with him? What is Kohansu gonna do? I mean, we kind of got to figure out what's going to happen with Solomon, even though I don't care. But sorry for how late this episode was also. I'm going to try to do better, but there's just so much going on. It's tough. I need to actually make a schedule of how I'm going to watch and record to kind of like work around the days that I have to go into the office at work. So until next week, peace.